What if I told you that a real-life experiment, darker and scarier than any movie, took place almost 90 years ago? An experiment so terrifying, it defies the very essence of human decency. This wasn't fiction. This was a true story that took place on a cold, desolate island in the heart of the Soviet Union. Imagine being trapped on an island, with nothing to survive on but your instincts and your fellow humans. You've heard of the Hunger Games, but this was worse. This is the untold story of the Cannibal Island, the place where humanity crossed every line in order to survive. And it all started in 1933, when thousands of innocent lives were cast into the heart of Siberia's frozen wasteland. But did anyone make it out alive? Stay with me as we journey through this chilling chapter of history. In the early 1930s, the Soviet Union was under the iron rule of Joseph Stalin. Known for his ruthless tactics, Stalin's grip on power meant that dissenters, criminals, and anyone deemed an enemy of the state were sent to the most unforgiving corners of the world. And in his twisted mind, these people were expendable. But Stalin had a more sinister plan. He wasn't just interested in silencing his enemies. He wanted to test the limits of human endurance, and what better way than to throw people into the wilderness, leaving them with nothing to survive on but their primal instincts. In 1933, a remote island in Siberia, Nazo Island, became the setting for one of history's darkest experiments. 5,000 men, women, and children were taken from their families, locked in wooden ships, and sent on a 4-day journey across freezing waters to this forsaken place. The catch? No food, no shelter, and no escape. They were dropped onto a barren land with nothing but the cold, the wind, and a slow, inevitable death. But the true horror didn't begin until they landed. What awaited them on Nazo Island wasn't a rescue mission. It was the end of the line. They were stranded in an unforgiving world, and soon, they would learn that survival came at a price no one was prepared for. With no food, no resources, and no way to stay warm, the survivors of Nazo Island quickly descended into madness. The hunger, the cold, it broke them. People who had once been family, friends, and neighbors now turned on each other in desperate fights for survival. It wasn't long before the first deaths occurred, not from hunger alone, but from violence. People, driven mad by their hunger, became predators. Gangs formed, and the strong preyed on the weak. Women, children, no one was spared. The survivors did the unthinkable. They started eating the bodies of the dead, not as a last resort, but out of necessity. Cannibalism took root, and soon, the island earned its dark name, Cannibal Island. As the days passed, the once faint line between humanity and savagery completely vanished. The survivors of Nazo Island were no longer people. They were simply animals, fighting for their next meal. And as the cold, starvation, and madness took their toll, the bodies piled up. The only thing left was hunger and bloodshed. But what made this tragedy even more terrifying? The people trapped on that island were part of Stalin's experiment, a cruel test to see how far humans could be pushed before they lost their sanity. It was a dark game, one where the stakes were life or death. As the days turned into weeks, more than half of those sent to the island perished. The survivors? Scarred, broken, barely alive. And the Soviet government did nothing to stop it. It wasn't until months later that someone finally took notice of the catastrophe unfolding. But by then, it was too late. In August 1933, the government finally made the decision to remove the remaining survivors from Nazo Island. But by then, over 2,000 people had vanished, likely swallowed by the river, lost to the cold, or consumed by the very people they once called neighbors. The survivors, when rescued, were weak, broken, forever changed by what they had endured. But the true horror of Nazo Island would remain hidden for decades. The Soviet government buried the evidence, and the tragedy was erased from history. It wasn't until the fall of the Soviet Union in 1990 that this dark chapter resurfaced. a human rights organization uncovered a classified report detailing the horrors of Nazo Island. Only then did the world learn the truth. But even today, the questions remain. Was this horrific experiment an accident? Or was it a deliberate act of cruelty, orchestrated by a mad leader? How far can human beings be pushed before they lose everything? Before they stop being human? The survivors of Nazo Island may have lived to tell the tale. But the island itself? It remains a place of death and darkness, hidden in the annals of history. So, the question lingers. What if it happens again? What if humanity is tested in ways we can't even imagine? What would you do to survive?